Hello and welcome to this techniques tutorial. My name is Samantha Wiltshire and today I'm going to be talking to you about diagnostics and problem solving for art making. And you'll see here that on my introductory slide, I have an illustration of an octopus which has been constructed, and I'm beginning to lay tone down into that construction. And so this is definitely the stage of your art making where you're very likely to be running across issues to do with tone and proportion, although you're likely to encounter problems the whole way throughout your art making. And hopefully using this presentation, you'll be able to feel empowered to overcome those issues when they arise. So our workshop overview is as follows. We're going to be learning how to problem solve using deduction. We're going to be learning 10 tools for resolving those issues once we've identified what the issues are. We're going to be understanding the importance and the use of thumbnail sketches. We'll be thinking in terms of X-ray vision and understanding how we can apply that for problem solving. We're going to understand form and how that contributes to problem solving. And then we'll be concluding and going through some references and further activities. You're not going to need any materials for today's workshop. Today's workshop is an introduction of some tools and techniques, and it's designed to accompany the other videos on construction which are being produced. So do make sure to take a minute to go and review those as well if you're not familiar with some of the techniques that we've discussed in those. Our lesson objective for today. Today, we are going to learn how to recognize a problem and how to put in place actions that may allow us to resolve that problem. These skills are really useful for some of the following reasons. They're useful for working independently in the absence of a tutor with confidence. They're useful for reducing stress and frustration while art making. And they're going to help you to produce better, more accurate, and more resolved looking drawings. So although it's really great to have the support of a classroom tutor, it's important that you are equipped with problem-solving skills that will allow you to work more independently in your own space at home. And being able to diagnose and resolve problems in our art making permits us to challenge ourselves, realize more ambitious ideas, and it allows us to feel more in control when issues arise as well. So to start with, let's talk about diagnosing a problem. We're going to play Sherlock Holmes. This is our Sherlock Holmes checklist of questions that you're going to be asking yourself when you know that something's off, but you're not sure what that something might be. And that happens all the time. All the time we'll look at our work and we'll go, something is not right, but I don't have a clue what the something is. And what you can do is you can print out this list, take a screen grab and run it off your printer and pop it up on your wall in your studio space, or stick it in your visual diary so that you can refer back to it when you're art making and have that reminder. And you will eventually get to a stage where you're asking yourselves these questions automatically while you're making your work. Certainly your tutors will encourage you to consider all of these factors until it becomes a little bit more natural to ask yourself about these things. So the first question you're going to ask yourself is it too big or is it too small? And then, is it too wide or is it too thin? Our brains love to warp and stretch things. They love to stretch things outwards and upwards and downwards, more so than they are in real life. And it's important that we consider whether or not that might have occurred when there's an issue. You're going to consider, is it too dark or is it too light? And a great way to do this is to squint your eyes. You're going to glare at it. That blurs your vision and allows you to see your largest areas of tone without so much detail as a distraction. You're going to ask yourself, is it too sharp or is it too soft? So we kind of think ourselves as being like a multifocal camera lens, and things which are in the background might be more out of focus, things which are in the foreground might be more crisp, but also things have a variety of textures. Sometimes the texture of something might impact whether or not the edge is going to be soft or is going to be sharp. And also sometimes shadows in particular, an object might have one or multiple shadows, some of which are darker and sharper and harsher, and some of which are light and soft and have a very blurred edge. And we need to pay attention to all of those things if we're looking for accuracy in our art making. You're going to hopefully ask yourself, is it the correct shape? So we're going to break anything that we draw down into really big, simple geometric shapes. And there's a video in this series that's going to demonstrate how to do that as well, that you should definitely watch. But we can consider those shapes at any stage in the art making process, even once our construction is complete. If something's gone amiss along the way, considering those shapes again can be helpful. You're going to ask yourself, is the color the right hue, value, or chroma? Now, hue, value, and chroma, those are terms which come from the Munsell color theory system that we'll discuss in another video in the future. And it's a way of understanding the three major components of color. So the three major components of color are, first of all, what color is it? Is it red? Is it an orange red? Is it a particular type of red, like a cadmium? What is that color? And that's what we refer to as the hue. The next component is value. That's how dark or how light that color is. So how close to white or close to black is that color. And this is one people forget all the time. They spend so much time focusing on the hue, on achieving the correct hue, that they completely miss that their color is multiple shades too dark or too light. So that's very important to think about. And then your chroma is how dull or how bright and saturated your color happens to be. So if we think about a color that's really vibrant, maybe even fluorescent, and then we imagine incrementally adding a little bit more gray paint progressively and making a scale, you would see that color desaturate until it goes back to its original state of being gray. And we want to know where along that scale that color might be when we're thinking about chroma. And all three of these things need to be correct in order to properly match a color. So if any one of those things is off, you're going to need to break down your color theory into these three elements to try and diagnose what the problem might be. The next thing I'd like you to consider is your negative space correct? So positive space is anything that is your subject matter, for example, a tree. And negative space is anything that is the empty space in between the elements of your subject matter. So that could be areas of sky showing through your tree branches. Your tree branches would be the positive space and the sky would be the negative space. And not only do we want to think about the shapes of our tree branches, but we want to think about the shapes of the spaces in between. And if you have a complex image with multiple items in that image, you also want to think about the relationships that they have with each other and the gaps that are in between those objects as well. I want you to ask yourself, is the balance or composition off? And if so, how could I create more harmony? Is there something at the minute that's being really bossy and taking my attention away from the elements of my artwork that I had wanted to be the salient feature or the subject matter of my artwork? Sometimes we have to shut things down and pull our focal point forward and have a bit of a play with the balance in order to say what it is that we're intending to say as artists. And then the very last thing I want you to consider, but maybe the most important thing, is the area that you think the problem is that really the problem, or is it actually the area that's next to it that's the problem? So as artists, we are relationship experts, and we need to make sure that every element of the work is cooperating. We want our entire work to be one big happy family. And if a particular blue looks incorrect, it might not be that it's the wrong blue. It might be that that blue is next to another color that's incorrect, that's throwing off the blue. In the same respect, maybe it's not that the shape of the nose is incorrect. Maybe it's actually that the philtrum, the mustache area that you have underneath your nose between your lip and your nose, maybe that area is actually too big or too small, and it's making your nose look too short or too long. So that's the sort of thing that I mean. It's important that you consider your work as a whole and all of its elements and how they combine together. And now we've got our problem-solving tool belt. So once we've decided what the problem is, what can we do when we're really frustrated and we don't know how to fix it? First of all, stand back from your work. View it as a whole. When we're this close to our artwork, we lose sight of what the issue is. And we start to get used to it. Our eyes get used to it, and we actually stop seeing our own our own mistakes, and we stop being able to understand what it is that we need to fix. So that's very important. And feeding into this as well, turn it upside down or on its side. Now, you'll need to make sure you don't just do this to your artwork. You'll need to also do this to your reference picture. It's always a little bit funny when I see people, they've got an upside down artwork, but a right way up reference picture. We want to turn both of them upside down, and that forces your brain to stop thinking, oh, this is a still life. Because now it's upside down, it doesn't look like that so much anymore. And your brain starts to think of it more in terms of those simple geometric shapes. And that's exactly what we want to do. We want to simplify it for ourselves. We want to see it with fresh eyes. And we want to be able to put aside the fact that it's a teapot or a face, and break it down into a more digestible format. Something we mentioned briefly before, you need to squint your eyes. So you're going to glare at it like it's done something wrong. You want to blur your vision on purpose. And that's going to mean that the only thing that you will see is the largest areas of really, really dark, and the largest areas of really, really light, and the biggest shapes. And if those elements, those largest elements, are incorrect, you can bet that every smaller detail is going to be off as well. So that should be your first point of reference when you're trying to work out what's wrong, really, is to look at the biggest elements of your artwork. Another thing we can do is play dot to dot. We're going to look for the landmarks. Now, if you're not familiar with landmarking is featured in our methods of construction and measuring video series a number of times. So definitely make sure to give them a watch. But what landmarking essentially is marking, let's say you have a curve. Let's say I'm illustrating my hand, and I'm going to put a little dash wherever the line of my hand changes direction. So here at the top of my knuckle, and at the base of my knuckle, over here as well. I'm going to be putting little dots wherever it curves. And then I can actually measure the increments between those little dots, and I can measure them comparatively to other things. So what's the distance between these two landmarks? How many times does that distance go into one fingernail, for example? And we are basically making ourselves an adult's dot-to-dot drawing game. It's really helpful to either use the entire time while you're constructing, or to actually fall back on if you think something might have gone wrong. Measure again and repeat. A lot of our issues end up being proportion issues, and the only way to determine whether or not that's the case is to break down into simple shapes and to apply those measuring techniques. We can ask the Sherlock Holmes questions again. So that slide that we just went through together, you can revisit that, run through it one more time. Did you really fully consider each one? Could there have been something you missed? Take a break and come back refreshed, all right? So our eyes, they get over it. We get frustrated. No one makes good art when they're frustrated. Well, artists, sometimes we can make very emotive artworks, and that might portray frustration. But when our art making really isn't going our way, sometimes forcing yourself through it, pushing yourself further, it does nothing but actually further overwork whatever it is that you're doing, and create a bigger issue. We're going to break it back down into those simple shapes. We already mentioned that. You're going to flick your eyes back and forth, and you're going to play spot the difference. All right. So hopefully you don't have your reference picture on a tiny little iPhone screen. Hopefully you've got a nice printout that's a decent size, or hopefully you've at least got it on something a bit larger like an iPad, so that you can flick your eyes rapidly back and forth between the two. And if you happen to be working from life, hopefully you've got your easel set up in a way that allows you to see both your artwork and your subject matter in one glance, so that you can do that flicking. And when we do that rapid flicking, the things which are amiss in our own work start to jump out at us a little bit more easily. And you can also do a quick thumbnail sketch. And now doing a quick thumbnail sketch is particularly valuable, and I'm going to walk you through why in just a minute. But another thing you can actually do, which isn't mentioned here in this tool belt, is you can always ask for a second tutor, peer, or layman opinion. So a layman, if you're not familiar, is a person who maybe isn't educated about fine arts. And sometimes their opinions are valuable also because they might give an alternative, fresh perspective from whatever life experience that they've come from about your art making. So let's talk about thumbnail sketches. Here's a little example of one that I did in charcoal. And the fun thing about this is it actually sold. Someone wanted to purchase it from me. So you never know if one of your thumbnails turns out to be quite nice, pop it in a frame, see if you can sell it for a cheaper price. And now you've got options for people who maybe aren't prepared to invest in one of your larger and more expensive works. So in terms of thumbnail sketches, some of their values include the fact that by having a go before you commit to a full artwork, you're establishing from the get-go whether or not this is a work that you actually really want to do. And if it turns out that this isn't inspiring to you, that you don't think it's going to work as a successful artwork, then that saves you a lot of time and money pursuing it as a formal, proper artwork, and then deciding to throw it away or to put it to the side. It also gives you a general sense of the biggest shapes, the biggest tonal areas, the overall design. It helps you to get an understanding of what it is that you would like to do as you approach this composition. So what you can do is you can also do experimentations. So not only thumbnail sketches, but you can do little experiments, grab a sheet of spare scrappy paper on the side and try out whatever it is that you're unsure of on a separate page before applying it to your major artwork. Another really helpful tool I find can actually be to take a photograph of your artwork in its current state and print out a number of copies, and you can actually experiment on the printouts of your artwork with some different approaches and technical resolutions before committing that solution to your final work. And that just takes off the pressure when you're feeling like you could be about to do something that's hard to reverse. It gives you a little bit more certainty going into that experience. And so some of the biggest things to do when we're doing a thumbnail sketch, remember they can be only a little postcard size if that's all you've got time for. We're going to need to remember to squint our eyes to blur that vision again, because thumbnail sketches are not about the tiny details. They're about the biggest features. They're about getting a sense of the large overall composition and tonal areas. Another thing which is really important that we can consider when we're trying to problem solve is we can use our X-ray vision. So what I mean by this is that when we consider what's happening internally inside of what it is that we're trying to paint or draw, sometimes it helps us to make sense of what's going on the outside, and it can help us to identify new problems. And this is particularly the case when it comes to anatomy and still life. So in terms of anatomy, you're going to want to think about, well, why do my eyes look funny? Could it be that I don't have a sense of an actual eye socket? Is there not enough tonal work to describe the fact that that's a concave area in the face where eyeballs sit? That's a really good example of how we might apply this. Or, oh, my cheeks, they're not looking like they've got a lot of structure. What gives my cheeks some more structure? Let me think about my cheekbones. Let me think about where they are when I'm drawing a self-portrait, for example. In particular, we want to be assessing what is the shape of the base of an object, or what occurs at the bottom, at the top. We also want to be thinking about what could be occurring in the center of the object. So if I'm drawing a pear, I want to think, well, what is the shape of the base of that pear? Where is the core? Where can I place an axis? And you also want to get a sense of texture. So am I trying to describe, and hands are a really good example of this, am I trying to describe skin on bone, like a harsh knuckle? Am I trying to describe squishy skin on muscle or skin on fat? If I'm doing an ear, is this skin on cartilage or is this loose floppy earlobe? So we want to think about texturally what's going on inside as well. And then we can also use our X-ray vision to understand perspective and to understand anything that we do with objects and still life as well. So rather than just drawing a cylinder and hoping for the best and dealing with whatever proportional consequences they may be, it might be far more helpful for me to put in place some perspective lines and to actually draw 2 ellipses in perspective, even though I know I won't see the back line that's over here, and for me to actually construct it in its entirety and then erase what I'm not actually going to see. That's going to help you to achieve a better sense of accuracy if you find that you're struggling. In terms of basic X-ray vision, you're also going to want to focus on anatomy. So we talked a little bit about anatomy before, but in particular, some practical things that you can do to understand anatomy. You can, first of all, surround yourself with lots of books and diagrams of human anatomy, of animal anatomy, whatever it is that you're working on, and have them accessible to you when you're actually producing your artworks. If you're doing a person, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what on earth is wrong with my armpit area? You're going to need to understand how the muscles in that armpit sit and operate in order to perhaps resolve that issue. You can also practice drawing anatomy. So don't just go into portraiture if you've never drawn a skull before. A skull hopefully should be the starting point for any portraiture artist. And another thing you can do is sign yourself up for some life drawing classes and practice drawing nude models. That can be really helpful as well. Sometimes we can also use form to help us problem solve. So if you're unsure what's going wrong, using things like contour lines can be really helpful for understanding 3D. So you'll see here that we've wrapped these lines around the body to understand the deviations in height, to understand the concave and convex areas. And it's just like a topographic map. If you've ever seen a topographic map where the lines become closer together as you go up the mountain, and it helps to describe gradient, that's what we're doing here with the human body. And I don't use this every time that I draw or paint, but sometimes a little bit of this is helpful. And this can also be really helpful for landscape as well. If you get a little bit stuck and you're not sure what's going on and why you're not making sense of your gradients in your landscape. Here are the references for all of the images, both in this PowerPoint and in our overall lecture series for construction. And here's what you can do next. What you can do next is print out the Sherlock Holmes list and the problem-solving tool belt, stick them up on your studio wall for revision. You can practice talking to yourself and asking yourself questions about what you're doing as you produce your art making. You can produce a series of anatomy and object X-ray vision drawings to assist you in improving these skills. You can collect some anatomy books for reference when art making, and you continue to watch. You can continue to watch the rest of our construction demonstration series. Thank you so much for your time. Our long-term goal here is to feel completely comfortable producing art in your own home without a tutor present. That's what we're working towards. And we're finishing up with a really nice demonstration of how an understanding of the skull factors into an understanding of the muscle, which then can produce a beautiful final self-portrait. Happy art making. See ya.